Hi, I'm Lee Ehrenberg, and I'd like to welcome you to another event of The Living Room. The following program was recorded at the Santa Monica Public Library and is brought to you in collaboration between the library, the Friends of the Library, CityTV, and the California State Library. Now sit back and enjoy.
We are very lucky to have a wonderful speaker with us tonight, Dr. Joshua Grill. He is the Director of the Education and Recruitment Corps at the Mary S. Easton Center for Alzheimer's Disease Research at UCLA. He is a volunteer with our organization, and we're very lucky to have him speak to you tonight.
So I've been asked to speak to you tonight about the link between the healthy body and the healthy brain. This is a very important link, of course. Our center, the center in which I work, the two centers in which I work, are largely focused on dementia. And we're going to talk a little bit about dementia, but we're also going to talk about steps you can take to avoid dementia and other situations that result in an unhealthy brain. By way of disclosure, I am a basic scientist by training, not a clinician. I did a PhD in neuroscience, in which I studied the processes that occur as the brain gets older. And this is one of the things we're going to talk about tonight. We're also going to talk about the steps you can take to ensure that you keep a healthy brain, most specifically by trying to keep a healthy body. So I want to start by saying, well, what is a healthy brain? I think everyone probably feels like they have a good answer to that, but when you try and materialize that answer, it may be more difficult than you would have expected. The brain is unlike any other organ in our body, and I mean that in a number of ways. First, the cells that compose the brain, and there are many of them, are highly specified. They exist different from all the other cells in our body in that they can communicate with each other via electrical and chemical signals we call synapses. This communication is critical to the function of the entire central nervous system, most notably the brain. And it makes us very unique as human beings. Unique from other animals, unique even from primates that we think of as being very similar to us from a genetic standpoint. So you may have heard about how some primates are in the upper 90% similar to us genetically, even 99%. And that's true. But we still are clearly quite distinguishable from these animals, and that's because of our brains. Specifically one part of our brain, the cerebral cortex. It's this part of the brain that gives us our unique human characteristics, our abilities to create language and to express emotions, to have reason, and to store long-term memories as well. So it's really important, of course, then that we keep this ever so important organ as healthy as possible. On the flip side, what's an unhealthy brain? Well, certainly there are the potential for brain injuries that we should always be aware of, traumatic brain injuries, and I include strokes because I think of an injury as something that we can easily prevent. And I think we can all take major steps to try and prevent strokes. There are also diseases or disorders that affect the brain. We'll talk about some of these tonight, but not all of them. And so these things represent what an unhealthy brain is. Now, lots of things can affect what we all think of as probably the hallmark function of the brain, and that is memory. Memory may be our most notable brain function. And lots of things can affect memory, including even medications that the doctor prescribes. This is especially the case in older individuals. In fact, the average person over the age of 65 in this country, the estimates are at least 8 medications are prescribed to those individuals. And some of these medications can, in fact, affect cognition. So these are things to be constantly vigilant about. But Things like depression. If an individual is depressed, sometimes treating the depression can help the associated memory impairments. Nutrition, dehydration, thyroid problems. We already touched upon head injury a little bit. Tumor stroke. There are lots of things that can affect memory, and many of these, importantly, are reversible. Not all, but many. Aging also can affect memory and other cognitive abilities. So the brain, like any other organ in the body, changes with age. The changes that happen to the rest of our body are fairly recognizable. We all notice when we lose a bit of muscle mass, or we have an increase in adipose or fat tissue, graying of the hair. These are normal things that we all associate with aging, but we may not necessarily think about how our brain changes with age. And in fact, it does. The anatomical and physiological changes that occur in the brain with age are normal. They're subtle, but they can have impacts upon our behavior or our cognitive abilities. So slower processing, taking a little bit longer to do a complex math equation that you once did quite quickly, is a normal aging process. Perhaps changes in paying attention, sensory changes. We all undergo sensory changes that can impact our abilities cognitively as well, such as vision and hearing. And then hallmark, again, small struggles with memory. But these are very distinct changes from the cognitive changes associated with a disease, such as a form of dementia. So one of the things I always try to leave my audiences with is, what's the difference between normal aging and a dementia associated with age? Again, the brain does change with age. As we reach older ages, the brain will shrink very slightly. The number of synapses that occur in the brain will decrease slightly. This is very different from the changes associated with a pathological process associated with dementia. So I said that memory changes can occur. And I always say in Los Angeles, we have these giant parking structures with many floors, and we have to remember the floor number and the letter of which section in the parking lot. And if we spend a few hours in the mall and we come back to our car and we have a little bit of trouble remembering, was it 3F or 4E, that's pretty normal. And for that to happen perhaps a bit more often as we get older is also pretty normal. I'll admit that it happens to me all the time. These are different from the memory impairments associated with a dementia like Alzheimer's disease. An individual who suffers from Alzheimer's disease suffers from extreme short-term memory losses. So they're likely to repeat the same question in a single conversation. I think you can see the difference between a memory loss such as one associated with dementia and a memory loss of a normal aging-related change. There are lots of other types of impairments to cognition that can occur, but Alzheimer's disease is generally noted with a signal of short-term memory impairments and some spatial navigation impairments as well. So having difficulty driving to work or the grocery store that you've been driving to for a long time. Getting lost at places that were once very familiar to you. These are the types of symptoms we associate with Alzheimer's disease. Like I said, there are other forms of dementia, and one other thing that I always try to leave my audiences with is what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease? A lot of people use them interchangeably, and depending on how you do it, you might be correct or you might be incorrect. Turns out dementia is what we call an umbrella term. That's why you have this crude representation here. And that there are lots of different types of dementia that fit under that umbrella. These include frontotemporal dementia, Parkinson's-related dementia, vascular dementia, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and of course Alzheimer's disease. Each of these dementias will present slightly differently. They all will have cognitive behavioral changes associated with them, but they'll have slightly different initial presentation especially. But of these different types of dementia, Alzheimer's disease is overwhelmingly the most common. 60 to 70% of all cases of dementia are Alzheimer's disease. So most of our focus this evening will be to talk about the cognitive impairments associated with Alzheimer's disease. And most of the focus of our center, while we study all forms of dementia, most of us are focused on Alzheimer's disease because it affects so many more people. In fact, statistics from colleagues in Chicago and with the Alzheimer's Association tell us that there are currently over 5 million Americans who suffer from Alzheimer's disease. And this is a problem that hits close to home with nearly 500,000 Californians and somewhere in the range of 140 to 150,000 people right here in Los Angeles County who suffer from Alzheimer's disease. This is excluding the other forms of dementia. So this is clearly an important problem, but also clearly one of the most common ways that people suffer from an unhealthy brain. So I'd like to spend the rest of our time talking about how we can keep a healthy brain. How can we stave off and lower our risk for Alzheimer's disease? How can we lower our risk for normal age-associated memory impairments or other cognitive impairments that accompany normal aging? And I'm going to run through a few tips for how to do that. Now, there are other things you can do, but this is what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about protecting your brain, this important, unique, and vital organ, getting enough sleep, avoiding things that are dangerous, potentially toxic to the brain, challenging our brain, and then keeping a healthy body. So let's first talk about protecting our brain. We're here in Santa Monica. We can walk down to the bike path along the beach, and we see people engaging in a lot of activities like bicycling, skateboarding, rollerblading. These are great things. These are good forms of exercise. We're going to talk a lot about exercise later. But it's important to note that engaging in exercises such as these puts you at risk for a head injury. Head injuries are very common in this country. We call this in the field a traumatic brain injury. This is a blunt injury to the head. And you can see the numbers here. Cycling, for example, over 150,000 people annually have a head injury as a result of a cycling accident. Many people annually visit the ER. There are some deaths associated with head injuries from cycling. And 3/4 of them could be prevented by wearing a helmet. So the take-home message here is an easy one. And I'm sure you've heard it before, but I'll say it again. Wear your helmet. The brain is too valuable an organ. And as you can see, I don't really care what kind of helmet you wear. I just like to have people protect their brain. I used to give talks to elementary school kids about just wearing a helmet, and I used to tell them that I knew the value of the brain, so I actually wore a helmet if I was walking somewhere, let alone if I was on a bike. So wear a helmet. The next tip for keeping a healthy brain is to get enough sleep. This is a graph about what we believe to be the needed hours of sleep throughout the lifespan. Now, you'll hear many, many people say, as you get older, you need less sleep. You've probably all heard that. You might have even said it. This graph shows you that that is factually correct. As we get older, we need less sleep. Because when we're infants, we need a heck of a lot of sleep. We sleep most of the day, every day. And one of my favorite sayings was, how'd you sleep? I slept like a baby. I woke up every hour crying and screaming. As we get older, the number of hours of sleep that we need does, in fact, go down. We don't, as a teenager, need 18 hours of sleep. Now, the way that this fact gets misconstrued is that we assume as we become older adults, we can get away with less sleep. But if you'll notice, once we reach adulthood in this figure, the line is level. It levels off at about 7 or 8 hours. So for the rest of your life, once you get down to needing 7 or 8 hours of sleep, you will need 7 or 8 hours of sleep. Are there a few individuals out there who can live with less? Sure. These are based on normal distributions of great populations. But for the overwhelming majority of people, we need 7 or 8 hours of sleep. Historically, our sleep levels really went down with one single monumental event. It was the invention of the light bulb. The average hours of sleep decreased by 2 hours when that happened. And I don't think I've ever seen any statistics, but I bet the internet might have had a similar effect. The point of this is that we all need our sleep. We can try and fool ourselves into thinking we need less because we're getting older, but we'd be doing just that, fooling ourselves. Why is sleep so important? Sleep, and not getting enough sleep, certainly affects our brain. There are very interesting case studies. There was a disc jockey once who was doing a benefit marathon, staying on the air for as long as he could to raise money for a charity, a very noble gesture. By the end of his time on the air, he had locked himself in, wouldn't let anyone else in, was presenting symptoms of psychosis as a result of sleep deprivation. This figure is from a study in which a group of researchers compared people who were well rested to people who were sleep deprived on the open road in France, driving. What you're seeing is the number of times people went across that yellow line as they were driving. The really low bars represent the people who were well rested. They were driving for 10 hours. And you can see they could drive for 10 hours. They had a few 15-minute breaks and I think a 30-minute lunch break. They didn't cross over the line very much. They weren't in grave health danger. But those who were sleep deprived, see the height of those black bars? They were swerving all over the place under the same circumstances, save only that they were sleep deprived. So it affects performance, and performance is brain performance. It always boils down to the brain when it comes to performance. In addition to these more acute performance issues, not getting enough sleep can lead to chronic health concerns like obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, some psychotic symptoms such as depression and anxiety, and alcohol use. These things put you at risk. These are health concerns that also put you at risk for other things. If you have diabetes or cardiovascular disease, you are at greater risk for Alzheimer's disease later in life. So we, in some ways, can trace from Alzheimer's disease back to getting enough sleep. So getting sleep is very important. So how do we do that? How do we get a good night's sleep? Here are a few tips. Set a schedule. If you go to bed at 10 o'clock every night and get up every morning at 7, and then on the weekend you stay up till 5 a.m. and sleep until 4 p.m., it's going to be difficult to fall back asleep on Sunday night and get up on Monday morning. Sounds like common sense, but we all kind of engage in it to some extent or another. Setting a schedule is very important. Train your body to fall asleep at an appropriate time and get up at an appropriate time. Getting your exercise does help you fall asleep. Some people believe getting exercise too close to bedtime is not necessarily ideal. I will say it's better than not getting any exercise, but you have to work out that part of your schedule on your own. Avoid caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. The notion of the nightcap is another falsehood. Alcohol does have a side effect of making you drowsy. However, alcohol will affect the brain rhythms associated with actually sleeping. And the sleep incurred after doses of alcohol may not be as restful as the sleep you get under natural circumstances. So avoid those things, especially close to bedtime. Find ways to relax before bed and help yourself sleep. Sleep until sunlight. There's actually one part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus that resets based on circadian rhythms, based on sunlight. This is how we help keep ourselves on that daily cycle. So getting up around the time that the sun comes up, obviously within reason, this is going to change, and we all have our own schedules based on our employment especially that we have to keep, but keeping as close to the circadian rhythms when possible is a good idea. Avoid wake behaviors in bed. We talked about training your body to fall asleep at the right time. If you train your body to be in bed but not sleeping, that can make falling asleep very difficult. So if you watch a lot of TV, even read too much in bed, especially during the day, this can kind of confuse your body and your mind. And then if you have sleep problems, and lots of different things can cause sleep problems, tell your doctor. There are ways to medically treat sleep problems, and you really want to see someone because I really believe that the dangers of not getting enough sleep are substantial. Next tip, avoid things dangerous to the brain. So we already touched upon alcohol. We're going to talk a little bit about smoking. I'm not going to dwell on this because I know you hear it everywhere you go. Every health lecture you hear, you get these too, but there's probably a reason for that. So alcohol. First of all, alcohol has acute as well as chronic effects. We get a little dehydrated from especially binge drinking of alcohol, and anyone who's drank has probably felt the neuronal properties of alcohol's effects. It's called getting buzzed or getting drunk. These are alcohol's effects in the brain. Alcohol has free access to the brain, and what it does is it actually takes cells in certain parts of the brain and turns them off. Remember I talked about these specialized cells, neurons, that have these chemical and electrical signals that they use to communicate with other specialized cells called neurons? Alcohol says, stop doing what you're doing. No more communication. It especially does this in one part of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a structure that exists on the sides of our brain, and it's incredibly important to forming new memories and forming short-term memories. In fact, it's the first part of the brain to feel the effects of Alzheimer's disease. And when that happens, the patient will undergo short-term memory impairments. Alcohol causes similar effects because it takes those cells in the hippocampus and shuts them off. So sometimes when we're drinking, the next day we can't remember everything from that period. That's because the cells in the hippocampus were shut off by the alcohol. Now there's good news and there's bad news. When the alcohol wears off, the cells turn back on. That's the good news. The bad news is if we do this over and over and over again, as in the case of chronic alcoholism, those cells will eventually die. This leads to a dementia-like syndrome called Korsakoff Syndrome. The hippocampus is progressively degenerated as a result of the abuse of alcohol, and it results in a syndrome that's similar to Alzheimer's disease, with severe memory impairments. Obviously, there are other effects of alcohol, like liver disease. Those can subsequently lead to other neuronal problems due to liver toxicity and even other specific syndromes as a result of impaired liver function. So I'm not telling you not to drink. I'm telling you to do it in moderation and to be careful about it. Smoking. Smoking is the single greatest source of human exposure to toxic chemicals. We think a lot about nicotine, and nicotine is important, but there are others. You've all heard that by smoking you increase your risk for cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease, vascular disease, pulmonary disorders, and of course, cancer. What about smoking specifically having effects in the brain? Well, again, we think about nicotine as the primary component of smoking, and nicotine is known to bind to certain receptors. So nicotine is like a key, and in the brain there are certain locks. And nicotine unlocks those locks. This is an endogenous receptor. It exists in the brain, and it has an endogenous ligand or key that exists in the brain as well. Nicotine happens to look a lot like that endogenous ligand. It will bind that receptor and cause activity. Some people have suggested that there are beneficial effects on cognition of having a cigarette. I'm not sure that that's true, nor am I sure that it's untrue. I am sure that people who are chronic smokers, who go without smoking, as is the case often in studies that suggest a beneficial effect of smoking on cognition, when they're withdrawn from smoke and then given it, their performance will increase. So they may be in withdrawal, decreasing their performance, and then when they get the nicotine again, their performance is improved. The more important thing is that there are over 4,000 other chemicals found in cigarettes and in the smoke of cigarettes, and we don't know exactly what the effects of those things are on the brain. So if you didn't already have enough reason not to smoke, there's one more. Okay, we're getting to the meat now, the meat of how to protect your brain. We're going to start, pretty much the rest of this talk is going to be about keeping a healthy brain and body through exercise and diet. We're going to start with mental exercise. Exercising that muscle the brain aerobics, if you will. It turns out that you can really lower your risk for Alzheimer's disease by maintaining an active brain, especially into older age. So a study by Dave Bennett at Rush in Chicago showed that people over the age of 65 who engaged in one of or more of 30 cognitive activities, they were 2.6 times less likely than cognitively inactive individuals to develop Alzheimer's disease. Now, to give you a frame of reference, if your parent had Alzheimer's disease, you're at increased risk to get the disease. That increased risk is approximately 1.5 times. So this suggests that you can do more to lower your risk by maintaining an active brain into old age than the risk factors associated with the genetics of having a relative who had the disease. And these types of activities that you can do into older age are extensive. There's lots of different things you can do. Puzzles, crossword puzzles, and your Sudoku. Traveling, knitting, gardening, board games like chess and checkers and other board games, playing a musical instrument, being involved in a book club. A book club has actually been tested as an intervention for Alzheimer's disease. I kid you not. These social activities and maintaining an active brain are turning out to be very important. So mental exercise is a great thing to do to keep a healthy brain. And this is not only associated with lowering risk for Alzheimer's disease, it's lowering your risk for those normal, more subtle, age-related cognitive changes as well. So as we go further, we get meatier and meatier. Okay, now we're to the two most important things, and the last one's going to be the most important, but first, diet. So I was thinking about how to talk about the importance of diet. And sometimes I refer to the brain as a giant parking lot. And I really like this picture because the reason I pick it is that I think of each of the specialized cells or neurons being a car, and all these little motorcycles in here could be non-neuronal cells. I think that's a neuroscientist joke, but it's a pretty accurate representation of what the brain looks like, because it looked like there were a lot of cars and a lot of motorcycles in there, right? We have 86 billion neurons in our brain, at least, and probably more of the motorcycles. And the reason I like this analogy of the brain as a big parking lot is because all these cars, they need gasoline. And for our cars in our brain, for neurons, gasoline comes in the form of glucose and oxygen. And the only way to get the gasoline, go to the gas station, is through the vasculature, the blood supply to the brain. We call this the cerebral vasculature. The brain only weighs 2% of our body weight, but it uses 20% of our blood flow. That's how important sending blood to the brain is. In fact, if you remove the brain tissue and look only at the blood vessels that supply the brain, it looks just like a brain. You might mistakenly think, well, that's just a brain, because it holds that shape, because there's so much vasculature to the brain. And just like cars, we need that blood glucose, we need that blood oxygen, and just like cars, the neurons produce exhaust. That exhaust comes in the form of oxygen-free radicals. These are byproducts of metabolism. And just like in our environment, as exhaust gathers and hurts our environment, the gathering of oxygen-free radicals is thought to be bad for our brain. In fact, some people believe that's what truly is happening when we age. It's these oxygen-free radicals having a negative effect on whatever tissue they're surrounding, including neural tissue. So how can we clean up our environment? How can we get rid of the exhaust? There are potent ways to get things out of our diet called antioxidants, fighting those oxygen-free radicals. And this is some of the dietary recommendations we make about making sure you get enough of those antioxidants. Many of the things listed on this slide have actually been or are being tested as therapies for Alzheimer's disease, in some cases for cancer. Many of them are based on epidemiological data, where a group that gets a lot of one factor is less likely to go on to get Alzheimer's disease relative to a group that does not get a lot of that factor. So some of those factors include vitamin E, vitamin C, folate, which is a vitamin we get out of leafy, dark green leafy vegetables, the cruciferous vegetables, vitamin B12. B12 deficiency can actually have cognitive impairment associated with it by itself. Everyone likes to hear about resveratrol. This is a chemical we're actually going to test as a treatment for Alzheimer's disease. It's an antioxidant found in red wine. Now, I always give the caveat, in order to get enough resveratrol from red wine to equal the dose we will test as a therapy, you would have to drink, I haven't done the math, but I'm quite certain you would cause more damage than good to drink enough. DHA is the omega-3 fatty acid found in fish oils, currently being tested as a therapy for Alzheimer's disease, easily bought at nutritional supplement stores. Curcumin, people in India are less likely to get Alzheimer's disease than are people in America. And it's believed, and there's good scientific background to suggest that curcumin has anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and anti-Alzheimer's disease properties. So it's currently being tested. There's also some notions that it could have anti-cancer effects. And avoid foods high in fat and cholesterol. Why? It's simple. It's simple math. They put you at greater risk for cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and diabetes. The things you hear about over and over again, just like smoking. They put you at risk for those diseases. In and of itself, you do not want those diseases. Add to the fact that they put you at greater risk to suffer cognitive impairment, such as normal aging, or even Alzheimer's disease, and it's double the reason to avoid those types of things that are going to put you at double the risk. Thankfully, the last thing I'm going to talk about has double the positive effect, and that's exercise. The single greatest intervention you can provide yourself to stave off age-associated cognitive impairments or Alzheimer's disease is physical exercise. Most of us don't do it. This is just from a study that suggested 75%, 3 out of every 4, 3/4 of us don't get the daily recommended amount of exercise. Why is that such a big deal to me? Because exercise lowers your risk for the things I've been repeating to you over and over again tonight. It lowers your risk for diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease. It also helps you stave off age-associated memory impairments and other cognitive changes. In this slide, you see in the red bars individuals who got a sufficient amount of exercise versus those who did not meet the required amount of exercise. This is actually a meta-analysis, a combination from many different studies. And you can see that people who get their exercise perform much better on a variety of cognitive tasks. Exercise has even been suggested to slow the aging process itself. As we age, certain parts of our DNA, actually, they're called telomeres, within our nucleus of cells, within the DNA, telomeres get shorter and shorter as a cell replicates. And it's been used as a measure of aging, how short your telomeres are. In this study, individuals who got their exercise had longer telomeres than people who didn't. In fact, they went so far as to look at twins. Twins, people who have the same genetic background. And in one twin, you get exercise, and in the other, you don't. The telomere length was different based on who got the exercise. So this really suggests that exercise not only helps the brain age, but actually slows the entire aging process. This is landmark. Who doesn't want to prevent aging? Exercise does specific things in the brain as well. Exercise leads to increased new cell birth. In the last decade and a half, we've come to understand that the brain is producing new cells throughout life. As we get older, the rate at which new cells are produced and the number of those new cells that become neurons decreases. if you exercise, you can replenish those levels. This has been shown over and over again in animal models and was recently shown in humans as well. So it's been confirmed in humans. Also, the vasculature that we talked about, the ever important source of glucose and oxygen to the brain, will constrict slightly with age. And exercise leads to not only prevention of that constriction, but the production of new blood vessels, making sure that we keep blood flow constant throughout what will hopefully be a healthy, cognitively intact older life. How does all this happen? Well, there's the good side of exercise on our body, the systemic effects, the prevention of obesity, the prevention of diabetes, the prevention of hardening of the arteries so that blood flow continues to go to the brain. But there are specific effects within the brain as well. Exercise causes the production of something we call neurotrophic factors. These are factors that help neurons stay healthy, do their job, live longer, live healthier, and they're produced in the brain. So exercise causes these factors to be produced in the brain. So it's got a double benefit. It's got systemic effects, keeping a healthy body, keeping healthy blood flow, healthy heart, healthy lungs. They supply the brain with blood and glucose and oxygen, but then it has direct effects on the brain itself. So doubly beneficial. And exercise has been shown. In this study, it was looking at older individuals who got 30 minutes of moderate exercise 3 times a week versus individuals who did not. Moderate exercise can be brisk walking. And what you see here, this plot shows, if we start with everyone in the study, every time someone gets Alzheimer's disease, the lines will drop. And so as the study goes on, the people who don't get exercise, the line drops faster, and more people in that section will eventually come to have Alzheimer's disease. The people who got their exercise 3 times a week, less of them will go on to have Alzheimer's disease, and those who do will get it later. That's what this shows. So we can lower our risk for Alzheimer's disease by getting exercise, and even in people who have Alzheimer's disease, exercise can be used as a therapy. This is a study of people who have the disease and putting them on an exercise regimen. Those who got exercise had the equivalent of half the effect you get from taking a drug for Alzheimer's disease on their cognitive performance. Without any drug, half the effect of the drugs that we have now on a measure of cognitive performance. So exercise helps stave off Alzheimer's disease. It even seems to slow the disease itself and can be used as a therapy. So the double benefit of exercise. Okay, so I was trying to come up with a colorful way to summarize everything that I've told you about my tips. And we have a spectrum, if you will, including the cardiovascular system and the blood flow to the ever-important brain. What kinds of things do we want to do and what kinds of things do we not want to do? First, we want to protect our brain. We want to wear that ancient Aztec helmet when we're riding down the bike path in Santa Monica so that we don't injure our brain. We want to avoid foods that are going to put us at risk for those systemic effects like diabetes and obesity, hypertension. We can do that one way by getting a healthy diet full of antioxidants, helping us avoid these things. And then, of course, our 2 forms of exercise, both mental and physical. So these are the positive things that we want to get a lot of. Coming up from the bottom are the negative things in red we want to avoid. So what do we do if we eat a lot of antioxidants, we get our exercise, we avoid high fats, we wear a helmet from the moment we get out of bed until we brush our teeth at night. We do all these things, and what if, after all that, we still feel like our memory is impaired? It's possible. It's very possible. if you feel like you're having cognitive impairments that you have never experienced before or that are growing gradually in your life, talk to your doctor. It's as simple as that. There are lots of things that can contribute to memory impairments. We had that slide earlier. Many of them are preventable. Some are even reversible. You know, if you're taking too many medications that's impairing your cognition, you have to tell your physician so that they can take you off some of those medications and hopefully restore your normal cognitive abilities. Some can be slowed. All must be addressed. So please, if you do suffer from cognitive impairments, speak to your physician. Lastly, all of the research that I've discussed tonight and all of the research that we conduct day in and day out at our center and at all of the different centers at UCLA and the different centers around the country rely on participation by research subjects. Much of the research we do is in a dish or using animal models, but clinical research, and especially research in Alzheimer's disease, relies on participation of patients or normal controls who want to help. There's lots of reasons to participate in research. Patients with Alzheimer's disease who come participate in research at our center, there are a number of medical benefits that they receive. They have the opportunity to work with physicians and scientists who have devoted their life to studying this disease. They've made it their life's work to study Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia. You have access to cutting-edge technologies, and this includes new treatments. We test new treatments for Alzheimer's disease. This is the case across the spectrum of medicine. And there are altruistic reasons as well. Many people choose to participate in research not for their own benefit, but to make sure that others like them or future generations don't suffer the same diseases that they do. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about participating in research and how it really requires a team effort. And we are proud to be part of that team, to partner with patients and families, to partner with drug companies developing these drugs, to partner with organizations such as the Alzheimer's Association who are getting the word out and raising awareness about this disease, and other organizations exist for other diseases, of course. We're proud to partner with the library that lets us come talk to you about these things. Make sure that you're aware that we're working very hard to find cures for these diseases and that we need your help. And then, of course, proud to partner with you all. Alzheimer's disease, as I said, affects 5 million people in this country, and it's expected that with the baby boom generation getting older, we will soon be faced with a crisis. Somewhere around 15 million people are expected to have Alzheimer's disease within the coming decades. So this disease may not be one that touches your life now, but it almost certainly will touch your life at some point. So we are proud to partner with everyone, all of you, and all of the people whose lives are affected. I just want to finish with leaving you a couple of resources. On the screen you see the number for our center. We're the Mary S. Easton Center for Alzheimer's Disease Research at UCLA. This is the basic number that you can call if you're interested in research or want to learn more. We also have a website that we keep very up to date and work hard to do that. If you're interested in participating in specifically a clinical trial for Alzheimer's disease, the number there for our clinical trials drug development program is listed. Also, the Alzheimer's Association is a wonderful resource for patients and caregivers afflicted with this disease. And of course, I again want to thank them for inviting me to speak to you tonight. There's their helpline as well as their website. The Adair Center is a NIA-funded center for other forms of resources that fund our center. We're an NIA-supported center on a national level. With that, I'm going to turn on the lights and gladly take all of your questions.
There was a phrase in the text at the bottom of the screen that said free radical something, or free oxygen radical. What does that mean?
So oxygen-free radicals are the byproducts of cellular metabolism, akin to the exhaust coming from those neuronal cars. And they can interrupt the way cells undergo metabolism there forward. And some people believe that over time they accumulate in the brain or in other organs and actually lead to the aging process. So it's the job of antioxidants in our diet to try and get rid of those.
Well, does that mean the oxygen is deficient in the radical? Or is it
It's actually a chemical terminology for the number of electrons on the oxygen. It makes it a free radical.
Is cigar as bad as cigarette?
I don't know. The question was, are cigars better or worse than cigarettes? And I'm afraid I think they could potentially be worse if they are unfiltered. But I think that they're probably similar, but I frankly don't know any data on whether or not one's worse than the other. My recommendation would be to avoid both.
You mentioned the stats, the statistics of Alzheimer's
Yes.
and dementia in this country. You also had a reference to India in regards to the cumin. But what about the other countries?
Yeah.
Is there any information on
This
that?
is, yes. So the question is that I discussed the statistics for Alzheimer's disease in this country, and I mentioned that people in India are less likely to suffer from Alzheimer's disease, though they are not spared. This is a global crisis. Make no mistake. Alzheimer's disease is impacting every country. Some countries are impacted more than others, just like some states in our country are impacted more than others. California has a lot more people with Alzheimer's disease than some of the other states because we have a lot of people in the single greatest risk factor for this disease is age. Age of onset is generally 65 years or older. So wherever you have a lot of people who reach that age, you're likely to have a lot of people who suffer from Alzheimer's disease. In fact, at 85, your risk has increased to the point where 1 out of every 2 people, the statistics vary, but 40 to 50% of people who live to be 85 will suffer from Alzheimer's disease. Luckily, it tails off from that point forward. So it's not a matter of if you live long enough, you will get Alzheimer's disease. That is not the case. But there is increasing risk with increasing age. This puts a terrible burden on countries that are just now having people live to those ages. They're experiencing explosions in the number of people who suffer from this disease. And we're probably a good example of that. 10 million baby boomers are expected to contract Alzheimer's disease. I shouldn't say contract, are expected to develop Alzheimer's disease. Sure.
Is it more here because there's more obesity than many other places?
Yeah, so the question, yeah. You want to get your, your
This
15
isn't the
minutes
question I
here.
really wanted to ask. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I just mentioned it might be because of the obesity here that we
Yeah.
have it. Like Italy, for instance, I mean, I don't know if they have it, and yet, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so the question is it because of our dietary habits, and I'll add my own sedentary lifestyle in this country. We showed that 3/4 of adults don't get the recommended amount of exercise. And certainly we have dietary habits where we're seeing increases in the incidence of diabetes in this country. And yes, our country is at greater risk to get Alzheimer's disease because of those increases in diabetes. Also, some countries have dietary habits that put them at lower risk. So the Mediterranean diet with a lot of fish, remember I talked about omega-3 fatty acids, a little bit of red wine, a little bit of resveratrol, all those good antioxidants in their diet seem to be at lower risk. And same for India with the curcumin. Yes?
I spoke to someone in Greece last week to tell them about my husband, and he knew all about Alzheimer's. And the island is Ithaca, which is an island, and they use a lot of olive oil, very good diet. He said most people 85 and older are coming down with Alzheimer's over there.
Yeah, so this kind of reiterates one point. I'll repeat the question. Letitia has spoken to someone in Greece, and the Mediterranean diet, of course, is prevalent in Greece, but people still suffer from Alzheimer's disease. All the recommendations I've made tonight will help you lower your risk. You'll notice I never said they'll prevent the disease. I'm afraid we're not there yet. I'm afraid we cannot tell you how to make sure, beyond the shadow of a doubt, you will never get this disease. What we do is talk about how to lower your risk. These are large epidemiologic studies where, for example, one group of people got exercise for 30 minutes 3 times a week, and one group of people failed to get that exercise. And remember, the group who didn't get the exercise, more of them went on to get the disease and get it earlier. The group who did get the exercise, less of them got the disease and seemed to get it later. But it didn't stop everyone from getting the disease. So we aren't yet, and the yet is important, we aren't yet able to tell you how to prevent the disease, nor can we give you a medication to prevent the disease. We're working very hard to be able to do that, but we're not there yet. So when I make these recommendations, I'm talking about lowering your risk, trying as best you can to be in those groups that were less likely to get the disease. Okay? Go. Okay, okay.
This is, how do you distinguish between the mind and the brain?
That's a next week's topic. I think there'll be a philosopher in here, you know, debating mind-body dualism by Descartes. You know, I don't really distinguish, to be perfectly honest. You know, I believe overwhelmingly that the brain is our most important organ. I believe overwhelmingly that who we are is who our brain is. And I believe that the mind is a construct that's been invented to represent the abilities of the brain.
Given the enormous numbers of people who are expected to get Alzheimer's, don't you feel as a doctor that you and the AMA should be agitating for universal health care? Because the nightmare prospect of a lot of people wandering the streets without the access to health care, and if you say go to see your doctor but you don't have a doctor because you have no insurance, seems to me this compounds the problem. And I was wondering if these associations of doctors who have so long rejected these kind of policies would now live up to a higher moral standard and perhaps agitate for universal health care.
Okay, so did everybody hear the question? Because it was a longer one. I'll first, just to be clear, I'll remind that I'm not a physician. I'm a scientist by training, but I do work in a clinical setting. We do clinical research. And there can be no mistake that the problem of Alzheimer's disease is overwhelmingly important, and agitation is needed. Rattling cages is needed. I mentioned that 10 million baby boomers are going to get this disease. I'll tell you that currently the associated cost for Alzheimer's disease in this nation is approximately $250 billion a year, excluding personal costs. And that if the expected outcome were to occur, where the tripling of the number of cases in this country happens, the expected cost associated with that is over $1 trillion. And that could single-handedly bankrupt the U.S. healthcare system. So we're working very hard to try and avert that outcome. We're trying to develop ways to slow the disease or prevent it, and doing everything we can to avoid that outcome. I am happy that there is agitation, as you put it, occurring at a grassroots level, at a local level. You know, I've been invited by local politicians to their district town hall meetings to talk about this disease, so they recognize it, and at a national and international level as well. Just in the last year or so, a bipartisan effort known as the Alzheimer's Study Group was initiated, founded by Newt Gingrich and Bob Kerrey, so a Republican and a Democrat, their efforts, and they've called upon experts such as Dr. Cummings, who's the director of our center, to guide them to help create a plan for the incoming president to deal with Alzheimer's disease and the issues you bring up at a national level. And similar things have been put in place in France and throughout the European Union as well. So I think we're at the tip of the iceberg for recognition. We're also at a unique time in the history of Alzheimer's disease in that people with this disease are starting to actually have voices for themselves. You know, we're able to diagnose the disease earlier and earlier, and that is a whole nother lecture topic actually, because it's a goal of ours to move it even earlier. We believe that people are afflicted with Alzheimer's disease before they become demented. We want to identify people who have the disease before they have dementia. That's one of our most important goals. And as such, as we get closer and closer to that goal, we're identifying people who have the disease who can speak for themselves. And so serving as their own advocates, and we are, in fact, I think, making headway in recognizing the magnitude of the problem that is so rapidly approaching. So I hope that answers your question, and I hope I did it in a politically correct way. Right here in front.
Thank you. I'm wondering if someone is at increased risk, maybe not symptomatic or either they're older or either younger, to prevent Alzheimer's. Let's say they have family members, they had a head injury, or they had diabetes, or one of these other factors, metabolic syndrome. Would you then? Are there any studies to indicate where exercising more than 30 minutes 3 times a day is more beneficial, or taking supplements of antioxidants beyond the dietary intake of is more beneficial, or versus or just eating well and getting normal exercises?
Right.
You know?
So the question is a good one. The question is, what if you're on the opposite side of the coin? What if you've had a head injury, and you know, depending on that head injury, or I can't really give you any numbers about risk, but if you also have a parent who had Alzheimer's disease, which, as I mentioned, puts you at about 1.5 times the risk. We know that there are genetic risk factors as well, and you also have diabetes. You know, it sounds like almost a worst case scenario. The nice thing about the risk factor notion is that we also know that those are simply risk factors that increase your risk, and there's no guarantee that that person will get Alzheimer's disease, right? So that's the good thing about that. But I understand your question is, what can you do then? And what you really got at is a premise in science called the dose-response curve. That is, we know that getting your exercise lowers your risk if, you know, as we said in one study, if doing mental exercise reduces your risk 2.6 times lower than it would be otherwise, what if you did twice as much mental exercise? Could you lower your risk 5.2 times as much? And most of these things haven't been studied on a dose-response aspect. I think there have been some minor studies suggesting dose response in exercise, but I can't quote them with any certainty, and I don't think that, you know, it's a broadly accepted theme. Same, unfortunately, for the dietary components. In fact, we really don't even know the exact doses that are best. We just know that eating a healthy diet, getting those things in your diet, is a good idea. It lowers your risk. But we can't make the absolute recommendations. You should take this much of this, this much of this, this much of this, and that's it. You know, we're talking about lowering your risk, and the tests that would need to be undertaken to get those answers would be incredibly expensive and difficult to perform. So I'm afraid my answer is that I don't have an answer for you. When it comes to exercise specifically, I usually say that something is better than nothing, and more is better than a little. But you know, we don't expect 70-year-olds who've never exercised a day in their life to be training for triathlons. We do expect them to make an effort to get their exercise. If it's sitting on the couch and engaging in some sort of calisthenic-like exercise where you're lifting your legs and moving your arms and simulating, you know, other exercises, then that's what you do. And if you can get off the couch and go for a walk for 10 minutes or walk 2 miles around the block at your own pace, then that's even better. So someone that hasn't, yeah.
If another country finds a cure for these diseases, will the FDA accept the fine?
Yeah, so the question is, if another country finds a cure for Alzheimer's disease, will the or any other disease, will the FDA accept those findings? The answer is yes. We work in an international, global community. In fact, this summer I was at the International Conference on Alzheimer's Disease. It was in Chicago, and there were close to 10,000 people from all over the world. This is, like I said, this is a global crisis. My boss, who I alluded to earlier, Dr. Jeffrey Cummings, serves on international task force, where the greatest minds literally in the world come together to talk about this problem and how we're going to fight it and hopefully defeat it. So a drug that is soon approaching the potential for FDA approval, the first study was conducted in Russia. And there's an ongoing study in North America. And those data, if the second study works, the FDA will likely accept those data and we'll have a new drug. And it's a matter of only making sure that the studies are performed in a scientifically sound manner, and the FDA is very good at determining that. And like I said, it's an international effort right now.
Over thousands of years, people have been practicing things that have been proven to prevent things like Alzheimer's, including yoga postures and other yogic processes that are psychic and not physical. Have you done any research into that?
So the question was, what about some of the traditional medicines or interventions, and by traditional we're talking before the time of the United States and beyond. Some of the ancient Chinese remedies have actually been examined. There's an ongoing prevention study of ginkgo. We're waiting. Including substances. I'm not aware of any studies that examine yoga poses per se. But huperzine, ginkgo, some of the herbs have been and are being tested as interventions. I think you might have a follow-up, and that's okay. This brings up an opportunity to just mention that the testing of these things is of the utmost importance. And we as a center will never recommend something that has not been thoroughly and adequately tested in what we call a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. This is the only way to know if a medication is safe and effective. And so you will hear about things, especially as treatments for Alzheimer's disease, that are miraculous cures. And unless they've been tested in that manner, we do not recommend them. The FDA, of course, would never approve any form of therapy that has not been tested in such a rigorous manner. So that's just something to be aware of.
And the psychic exercises also help make the mind so active and directly affect the neurology in a progressive manner forward in the brain.
So we talked about exercising your brain, and I couldn't agree with you more. Exercising your brain is critical. But again, until we have controlled mechanisms of testing these things, they can't be approved, if you will, as a therapy. Does that mean I am telling you not to do them? Absolutely not.
Is your clinic capable of taking on that challenge?
No. I mean, not currently. That would be a difficult study. Not to say that it couldn't be done, but we're very focused in our clinic on research that moves the diagnosis earlier using biomarkers of the disease and tests new drugs that are in development based on what we've learned in the last two decades especially about the pathological changes occurring in the brain. So not to say that we couldn't, but I'm just telling you we are very focused on what we term the therapeutic imperative at accomplishing in parallel these two goals by which we will be able to diagnose people before they become demented and slow, if not halt, the progression of the disease. In fact, if we can slow the disease by 5 years, delaying diagnosis by 5 years, we would cut the total number of cases of Alzheimer's disease in half. So that is very much our focus. And I don't mean to detract from your point. And I think that that's a worthy study, and only through such a worthy study will we know for sure if that intervention worked. And I'm not doubting the historical aspects of it. I'm just telling you that these studies are what is so critical to understanding the safety and efficacy of any intervention, be it medication or otherwise. Yes, we're in the back.
Hello. I'd like to know the difference between the vitamin E and fish oil, and whether they can be combined with each other or not.
Again, both have been, the question is what's the difference between vitamin E and the omega-3 fatty acid oil, the omega-3 fatty acid DHA found in fish oils. They both have antioxidant properties. They both are being pursued for various clinical syndromes. Can they be taken together? Yes. They both seem largely to be safe. There were some data with a very high dose of vitamin E suggesting some cardiovascular risk. I am not an expert on that study, but we recommend a lower dose relative to that, to the one that was in that high dose study. The issue with all of these supplements is that, again, we're talking about lowering your risk. We can't make any claims about prevention. We just aren't there. We also don't know, cannot rule out, that if one supplement is effective, another may take away its effect. We don't know. And it's very difficult to study, and we are not likely to know that anytime soon. So that's why we recommend a healthy diet with these things in it. If you choose to take these supplements, talk to your doctor about it. Make sure you're not putting yourself at risk for anything else. And that's about all I can say, unfortunately. Okay, where are we going? Okay, 2 more, and then I think and then I'll gladly stick around and answer some more. So 2, anybody that hasn't asked a question yet? We got one in the back, one over here. One in the back and one in the front, I'm told. So we'll start in the back, Cammie. Okay, so the question was, how many people have been diagnosed in this country? And it's roughly 5 million. I mean, we don't count the number of diagnoses, of course. These are epidemiological studies where we look at a small sample and extrapolate to the nation's population, how many people. We're at about 5 million, but we're increasing every year. So a few years ago, if you'd have come hear a talk on Alzheimer's disease, it would have said, the speaker would have said, we have now reached a point where there are 4 million people in this country suffering of this disease. And then we would have went 4.5. And last year we would have said we're almost at 5. And now we're at 5.2. And it's going to keep growing because the baby boom generation is getting older and more people. And this is a tribute to science and medicine working. Right? More people living to the age of 65 or older is a very good thing. We are aging as a population because we've gotten better at helping people live longer, healthier lives. It just so happens that aging is the greatest risk factor for this disease, and as more people live to these ages, more people will suffer from Alzheimer's disease. So that number is going to grow, but I can spin it so that it's a good thing, because it means we're doing our job. Okay, and I think we're going to have one last question.
Yeah, we need you to use the mic for the recording.
Thank you. Are you studying the younger people because of their tremendous advancements in technology and the digital types of things?
Yeah.
Are you making a study of that?
Yes, so the question is, are we studying younger people as well as people who are older and have reached the ages in which Alzheimer's disease is likely? And the answer is absolutely. Studies are ongoing in which we look at various groups, and this is at UCLA, but this is worldwide. Various groups who are at risk. It could be people who have started to experience a memory change at a young age, but don't meet the criteria for a dementia. There's a study like that going on right now, actually imaging the brain and looking at the genes over time in those individuals. It's a very exciting study. There are studies that look at the children of people with the disease. There are variants of the disease for which we understand the genetics much more. UCLA is a important center for that type of research, looking at what we call familial Alzheimer's disease. It's a small subset of the disease, but it has an early age of onset. So there's many different types of research. We also, all of the centers that are funded by the National Institute on Aging follow people for long periods over time. That includes people who have the disease as well as people who do not. And the important part is that we can look back for many years at these people. And all of the data at centers like ours goes into one national repository. So that when we ask a question, instead of looking at 100 people who were in a study at UCLA, we're looking at 3,000 people who were in centers just like ours nationwide in New York, Florida, Missouri, Washington. I mean, we're doing everything we can to do this as efficiently and effectively as possible. So I think we're going to stop. I'm going to say thank you. I'm not going anywhere.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Grill, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you to all of you on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association. I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation. We do have a lot of other materials, so if you're interested in getting anything else, please call our phone number and we'll be happy to get that to you as well.
Program was recorded at the Santa Monica Public Library and is brought to you in collaboration between the library, the Friends of the Library, CityTV, and the California State Library. That's a wrap on another episode of Cool People, Places, and Things here on the West Side. For CityTV, this is Lee Ehrenberg. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Great job, Lee.
Is that a cut? We got it? Okay,
We got
guys.
what we
All right, thanks. See ya.
Hey, where are you going?
I got some personal business to take care of. Come on, guys. Stop rolling, okay? I agreed to do a reality show about hotspots in Santa Monica, but I can't let you follow me to my living room.
Lee, it's a library. What's the big secret?
The big secret is that at Santa Monica Public Library, what you see is not just what's on the shelves. All right, it's against my better judgment, but let's, as they say here at the old biblioteca, let's check it out.
Wow.
I told you.
This place is incredible.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's got a super high green rating. It's Wi-Fi throughout. So the space actually feels alive, like a living room.
Hey, Lee!
Hey, what's going on, guys? How
Back
are you?
again.
Yeah, I'm always here, dude, huh?
Oh, did you get our tweet?
Yeah, is it 3 o'clock?
3 o'clock in the auditorium.
All right, dude, I'm gonna see you there, okay?
All right.
Later, later,
Bye.
bye.
Friends of yours?
No, those are librarians.
No way.
Yeah, they're all super cool. I even friended them on Facebook and I follow them on Twitter. That's how I know one of my favorite authors is speaking at 3 o'clock today in the auditorium. Hey, you wanna grab a coffee and check it out?
Coffee?
Right this way, Miss First Time at the Library.
Oh,
It's a good latte, right?
that's my line. Can I at least have two
oh.
words?
I'm sorry, what, are you criticizing the writer?
No,
I
but I
don't
mean,
think
you had
you're
a
lucky to be in
paragraph.
this if you weren't good looking. Seriously. Heather, we put a lid on these. We can go inside, we can check out the latest CDs, DVDs, bestsellers.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's great for you, but I don't live here. I live in the South Bay.
Do you got a California driver's license or a photo ID?
That's it?
That's all you need for a library card.
I'm out of here.
What? Where are you going?
Get my library card. Dwayne, let's go.
Are you going too? Ah, great, there goes the neighborhood. Hey guys, welcome to the It's Cool to Be Smart Club. Why don't you join the happening at Santa Monica Public Library, where the brains meet the beach at 6th and Santa Monica. Check us out today.